Hi, I'm Grant Murray. I'm a student at the University of Western Sydney. Welcome to my queer culture video research report titled Sexless and Genderless, or Genderqueer Children, Contemporary Manifestations of Queer Culture. A human baby is involuntarily prearranged gendered identity of being one version of sex or the other, depending on the baby's chromosomally determined sex organs. Queer theory deconstructs societal norms of biologically sexed bodies, gender exposition, and sexual desire, and is vital to critically discuss instances of sexless identities, gender fluidity, and genderqueerness. Queer theory explains and describes that sexless, gender fluid, or genderqueer children embody identities that are socially disruptive, contemporary manifestations of queer culture. I will accordingly apply a queer analysis to argue children who are neither allocated an identifiable sex nor taught socially constructed gender norms are embodiments of the deconstruction of contemporary, fundamentally heteronormative understandings of sex and gender. Kathy Widerick and David Stocker are parents to 3 children, Jazz, Keo, and Storm. Suitably named due to the media attention, Storm has been born sexless, or in other words, without a biologically identifiable sex or gender revealed to the public. After Storm's birth, Widerick and Stocker informed their close kin that Storm's sex would not be shared at that time for the purpose of a tribute to freedom and choice in place of limitation. Widerick expresses that it is a discursively transformative topic and that it's important to challenge orthodoxies and raise questions. Additionally, there is corroboration that Storm is not completely unique, as more parents allow their children to explore sex and gender rather than preset it for them. These children actively deconstruct the seemingly stable performative and heteronormative forces that determinantly influence a baby to reiteratively do their gender right according to their sex. In queer analysis, these examples demonstrate a disruptive deconstruction to the conventional sex and gender norm of assigning a child an identity before they develop independent thought and action. It is common regulation for parents to allocate and reveal the sex of an unborn child. Consequently, babies are predisposed to performing a particular predetermined gender identity because they are born into the matrix of normative sex, gender, and sexuality alignments. This operatively engages and reproduces performative notions of sex and gender roles by encouraging stereotypically gendered gifts for the baby. For example, frilly pink dresses for the girls and blue overalls for boys. Sexed identities are informed by one's biology, behaviour, and sexual desire, as well as reiteratively enacted through the identification with and reproduction of a particular gender. Additionally, queer theory engages with the fictional stability of sex, gender, and sexuality and the role of institutional power in the construction of identities. Babies are born without power or agency and therefore immediately become facets of a matrix to which society preconstructs. The sociological community tends to agree that sexed and gendered identities result from the exerted power in repeated performative productions of institutionalized cultural conventions. Thus, reiterations of sex and gender identities are socially reconstructed by repeated performance and are queerly disrupted by the agency demonstrated in not reproducing gender identity conventions. A baby without a sex is threatening to the social order of heteronormative alignments that are socially deemed inherently natural. The strict regulation of the heteronormative matrix of understanding makes seemingly stable identities knowable and coherent as social realities. Furthermore, Jagosz states heteronormative alignments of sex, gender, and sexuality are taken for granted as natural societal norms because heterosexuality is naturalized by the performative repetition of normative gender identities. Additionally, stabilized heteronormativity maintains its power and agency over other gendered, sexual, sexed, and desire identities via enforced stereotyping. Thus, queer theory reveals a child that is not introduced to society with an identifiable gender, in other words, a socially incoherent sexless child, is therefore automatically unheterosexual and does not conform as an identifiable member of society. Jazz, Storm's eldest brother, inspired Whitterick and Stocker to conceal Storm's sex because Jazz questioned whether or not the new baby would also be allowed to wear pink and dresses. Children tend to agree that gender identity is personal and a decision-making process that should be inclusive of options. Moreover, Jagosz states that it is probable identity is one of the most naturalized cultural categories each of us inhabits. One always thinks of one's self as existing outside all representational frames, and as somehow marking a point of undeniable realness. This demonstrates children have the capacity and agency to decide what makes up their self, or in essence, their authentic identity. Whitterick and Stocker are confident their children have been given the freedom to choose who they want to be, unconstrained by social norms about males and females. Also, gender research suggests that difference is not hardwired because it can be fluidly altered by one's subjective social identity. However, some say Whitterick and Stocker's choice is alienating. This alienation conveys Storm as unknowable and inconceivable to society, ultimately threatening to social fabric. Also, this exhibits the social pressure on new parents to adhere to and enforce the strict regulation of the stereotypical sex and gender identity of newborn babies and children to conform in a comfortable heteronormative matrix of understanding. Thus, queer identity is arguably unreal and destabilizing. Therefore, in Storm's and children like Storm's case, their identity persistently queers preconceived reiterations and notions of sex and gender identity. Like other parents who choose this sexless and ungendered course of child rearing, Whitterick and Stocker hold an ethically unstable standpoint as self-identity is socially deemed necessarily informed by gender. However, Fine claims children that are knowledgeable of their biological sex, theoretically, have the means to socially maneuver their sex and gender identity. Likewise, Whitterick reveals that her eldest son Jazz realised his gender-fluid identity in his own right by the time he was 5 years of age. Children's development research shows children by the age of 2 are comprehensive of their own biological sex and begin to register gendered and social conventions and symbols. For example, how we dress and communicate. However, The Agenda with Steve Paikin hosts a discussion on the ethics and psychological effects that the freedom of the social experiment will have on Storm, and likewise Whitterick and Stocker's other children. Poisson adds that psychologist Diane Ehrensaft fears Whitterick and Stocker may have created, for Storm, an other-than-other gender category, which could further marginalise the child. Yet, this equates Storm's well-being, like all other humans, to having a specified and identifiable gendered identity. Conclusively, here, queer theory demonstrates that the instability the discussion reveals is deconstruction of gender and human identity. We thus infer from the ethical and psychological concerns that it is a sociological concern that children with no identifying sex will not have a sexed place in society and therefore not fit in. This fictional and unstable matrix does not describe all people's behaviour because it's a system of norms, after all, not an empirical description of social existence. This concern demonstrates an irrational fear of the threat queerness poses to the heteronormalized social order. Brinkman et al. State that their research findings suggest that children's gender identity development is usually constituted as a fluid process, inclusive of both binary gender-applied activities. Likewise, Volocki states, the binaries revealed to be cultural constructions or ideological fictions, the reality of sexed bodies and gender and sexual identities are fraught with incoherence and instability. Correspondingly to Widerick and Stocker's parenting style, Brinkman et al.'s research findings also suggest children place high regard to be free to be their most authentic self. Authenticity, then, by this context, is being ultimately true to one's fluidly free identity without reiterating inherently unstable characteristics. Thus, queer theory reveals this is a deconstruction to relatively contemporary notions of child identity. While this collision of philosophy with reality is ethically challenging, sexless and genderless children are not supported by significant and conclusive research determining the efficacy or incompetence in raising children in such a way. However, we must note that modern parenting is mobilizing freedoms of gender fluidity in child rearing without pressure of sexed or gendered identification. Gender fluid child rearing, analysed through queer theory, demonstrates that these children symbolize a deconstruction of modern sex and gender relativity and stereotyping. The instances of sexless or gender fluid children embody manifestations of queer culture, as queer theory quintessentially deconstructs the instabilities of sex, gender, and sexuality norms of society. The discursive social and media reaction that sexless and gender fluid children like Widerick and Stockers are evidence of the instabilities and heteronormative ideals of sex, gender, and sexuality identity. Thus, the queerly deconstructive practice of rearing a sexless, gender fluid, or genderless child is ontologically incoherent because of customary socio-cultural norms that operate within a heteronormative matrix of understanding.